give amazingly and abundantly beyond anything we could imagine, and yet we take what is not given. Turn, if you will, to Joshua chapter 5, because this story really reaches ahead. And there's some principles in the book of Joshua that I think apply to where we need to go over the next 4 weeks. So this is Joshua chapter 5. It's the very beginning of the Bible. I didn't get the page number in the note sheet today, but it goes like this: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and then you get to Joshua. So find Joshua. We're going to chapter 5. And when you get there, we're just going to read 2 verses, verses 10 and 12. Joshua 5, 10 and 12. 10 through 12. On the evening of the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated the Passover. The day after the Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain. And then we see this weird passage. It says, the manna stopped that day. After they ate this food from the land, there was no longer any manna for the Israelites. But that year they ate of the produce of Canaan. Manna is again something that God had given. While they were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, they were hungry and they needed something to sustain them. They couldn't keep killing sheep because they could kill them faster than the sheep could reproduce. And so they needed some other kind of food. And they called out to God, and he said, okay, I am going to give you manna. Manna was this little white stuff that showed up on the ground when they woke up in the morning. Kind of when the dew evaporated, manna was left over. And we to this day don't really know what it is, but the Bible tells us it tasted kind of like honey cakes or coriander seed mixed with honey cakes. So we don't know really what it was, but it's another example of giving and people taking. See, God said to the people, I'm going to give you this manna every single day. And some people took the manna the first day, and they took as much as they could, and they stored it up, and God said, no, I'm going to give you manna every day. Well, the next day, when they looked at their jar of day-old manna, it was filled with maggots, and it was rotten and smelling and stuff. And it was just nasty. Somehow, overnight, it had turned, and God said, no, you missed the boat. I said, I will give it to you every day. You don't need to take more. But on the last day, there's a special thing. On the last day, on Friday, you're going to take twice as much, because on Saturday, I'm not going to give you any manna at all. That's your day of rest. You're not going to go out and work for it. And some people are like, well, whatever. I'm going to take my rest on Friday and not gather so much. And so they only gathered one, and Saturday comes and there's no manna. God says, I am giving you a day off. And they said, no, I'm taking a day of work. So often God says, I'm giving, and we take the wrong things. Well, now finally, Joshua is leading the people out of the wilderness into the land of promise. They have just crossed the Jordan River, an amazing story in itself. They've just crossed the Jordan River, and they are about ready to take possession of the land that God is freely giving to them. And as they enter the land, they celebrate the Passover, this amazing moment where God has spared the lives of the people and brought them out of Egypt. You know much of the story where God says to Pharaoh that the firstborn children are going to perish unless he releases the people, or unless they put a mark on their door frames, a mark of lamb's blood that says, we have heard God and will obey him. And if there is that mark of lamb's blood on the sides and top of the door frame, then the angel of death, when it comes through Egypt, is going to just pass right on over those houses, and the children will be spared. And so here they're celebrating that day of Passover, the landmark moment where God had given them something. He had given them their freedom. And so here they are, the day of Passover, and they celebrate by eating some of the grain that they collected from the ground. And they celebrate with some of the produce of the land, and the next day, there's no manna. Here's a first principle I want you to write down. See, God has plans for the Israelites to give them a treasure, but before he can give them the treasure of the land, he has to liberate them from the burden of the wilderness, and he does that by taking away the manna. You need to now invest in something different. So here's the blanks you need to write down. For God to give us treasure, he needs to take away our trinkets. In order for God to give us treasure, sometimes he needs to take away the little tiny things that we've been relying on, the little tiny things that we've been resting on. See, this is the deal. God has plans for us to give us amazing treasure that goes far and beyond anything we could possibly imagine. And yet we waste our daily lives worrying about how many points I'm going to get on the next Wii Fit game. Or worrying about, when am I going to get back to Applebee's because, boy, that chicken was awesome. Or something like that. We worry about all these little tiny things, and God says, I'm going to give you some treasure. Sometimes he has to remove a few trinkets in the way. I believe that's partially why this whole recession thing happened. Because God sometimes says, listen, you are focusing on the wrong stuff. Let's pull it back a little. Let's roll it back a little bit. And so he takes away their manna. He needs to liberate us from our trinkets. Okay, we're in Joshua chapter 5. We just finished verse 12. Let's read the next few verses, 13 through 15, and see what happens here. It says, Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, Are you for us or for our enemies? Neither, he replied. But as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come. Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, What message does my Lord have for his servant? The commander of the Lord's army replied, Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. This is an amazing account. I love it because Joshua is about ready to enter the land. And what you don't notice here is that Jericho was the landmark city opposing Joshua. Maybe you've heard that old song, Joshua in the Battle of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down. That's this. We're about ready to see it. We're about ready to see what happens. But they are entering the promised land. They've crossed the Jordan. That's landmark number one. They had to get over the river. The river was at flood stage at this moment in time, so it was a pretty daunting task. But God miraculously did that for them. So now they're in the land. They've just had the Passover. They've lost their manna. What do they need? They need to conquer something so that they can have some place to settle, to begin to live out this promise. They don't have any manna anymore. They've got to take some action. And Joshua is now at Jericho, and he's beginning to think, okay, wait a minute. Because see, Jericho was a city with a big wall around it. And that's no small feat for a bunch of ragtag people who came from Egypt and wandered in the desert for 40 years. They smell. I mean, they're not an army that knows what they're doing. They're just wilderness wanderers. And here they're coming up to this city, and there's a wall around it. And what he needs is he needs God to help him. And so he sees this angel of the Lord, and he asks the question that he needs to ask. Are you for us or for our enemies? Whose side are you on? Are you on our side or are you on their side? And the angel says, neither. I'm not on your side.